Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Um, Happy Friday again. The weekend is here. Um, so I hope you had a good week. I know I haven't been in, so I hope things went well while I was out. Yeah, and also wanted to go over something that we um, talked about a while ago. I know that we had plans for other classes, which I will still do for Fridays, so long as this is the schedule. Um, but it came up as we were driving around in the van. Um, and I think it's an important topic for us to be able to discuss, especially important topics like this when they come up. So, the topic is this: it's the houselessness crisis um, in the United States, but we're going to go over more in California. Because what happened was we were driving by and we saw a family sitting on the side of the road, and a discussion came up that some people said, "Hey, I think that they're not really houseless," and some people said, "I think that they are," and that sometimes you're not sure and things like that. But it came up, oh well, they have clothes on, and so there's a chance that they're not, and these are good discussions to have. So I'm glad people brought it up, but. I do think that it's important that we discuss what it really looks like and what it really is, and how we can help. And I say houseless. A lot of people say homeless. Um, I believe that people say America is the home of the free and the land of the brave. Well, I do believe that wherever you live is your home. Like California is our home. Individuals that don't have a house, they're houseless. They're not homeless. They everywhere is their home. Everywhere is our home, and we should feel at home wherever we are. And they just don't happen to have a house. And that is something that was explained to me, and I've taken it to heart. Y'all don't have to, but if I say houseless, that's what I mean. I just like to explain that part because sometimes people are like, "Why are you saying houseless?" Even though and it may seem a little over the top, but to me, it's not. But it is something that's going on, and we do see it a lot. And we see lots of people, and people have been displaced quite a bit by COVID and become displaced quite a bit by other things. So let's get started. So I went to Cal Matters, and it goes over. Basically, we're going to go over California's homelessness crisis, or houselessness crisis. This is homelessness crisis, and possible solutions explained. So California's most vexing, which is just frustrating and almost angering issue, is also its most shameful. And the large and rising number of residents who lack a safe place to call home in a state with vast amounts of wealth, more than 160,000 of its residents sleep in shelters, cars, or on the street. So the United Nations compared the tent encampments of San Francisco to the slums of New Delhi and Mexico City. Nearly 5,000 people live in the half square mile of Los Angeles' Skid Row. And while the problem is most acute in California's urban centers, houselessness is now a common fixture in many of the state's suburbs and rural towns. So it's not just big cities. State and local officials have pledged billions in recent years to help, but voters remain frustrated by a lack of visible progress. And again, that is one way that we can do it. Is it's important to vote. These things come up on the ballot. We have a ballot. Hopefully, you all voted. Um, it's important that we vote. And there was one on this last ballot, so I hope that you all voted. I should have done this class earlier, but it didn't come up, and I should have done a voting class earlier. That's what I should have done last Friday. My apologies. During the campaign seat before the September 14th recall election for Governor Gavin Newsom, his challengers wielded the state's houselessness woes as a political cudgel, pointing to the houseless population growth of nearly 25% under Newsom. The rise hasn't been lost on voters. A recent poll conducted by the Los Angeles Business Council Institute and the Los Angeles Times found 94%, that's a big percent, of voters consider houselessness as a serious or very serious problem, as it is. On January 7th, all Republicans in the legislature called for a special session focused on the houselessness crisis in a letter to the governor. They say that the state has spent billions, but the problem is only getting worse. And so here's a quote. We have been wrestling with this problem for decades now, and it always seems to get worse, which is something Senator Patricia Bates of Laguna Niguel said in a statement. It's time for real results, most of all for the countless houseless people suffering in our neighborhoods and communities. A special session will bring needed focus. We can and must do better. So here's what we need to know about California's houselessness crisis, including possible solutions. So, how many people are houseless? So, the last official tally or number of people living on the street was taken in January of 2020. So this is like 2 years old, before COVID ravaged the economy. So the next poll, it's obviously going to be worse, and showed 161,548 people experienced houselessness in California, with the biggest concentration in Los Angeles. The January 2021 count was postponed due to COVID-19, but is expected to take place again in 2022. So there should be, by the end of this year, another poll done. And it doesn't seem like maybe it's going to happen. Maybe they're doing the data right now and they'll just have to get it out before the end of the year. But it is growing. Yeah, and there's been ups and downs. Like 2014 was the lowest, closer to 100,000 people, and then it just started spiking in 2019 and 2020. The numbers shot way up, and that makes sense with everything going on with COVID. So those numbers should be taken with a grain of salt, as they're gathered on a single cold night in January by volunteers to provide a snapshot of houselessness. Experts say this method likely underestimates the unsheltered and doesn't capture the total number of people who fall into houselessness over the course of a year, which could be 2 or 3 times higher. And it definitely is. How many houseless people have phones? How many? Which you can. If we also have to remember, like I remember people saying, like, well, they have clothes on, they can't be houseless. A lot of people say, oh, look, they're on a phone. Why can't they get a job or something like that? It's tough, but you can get like a phone plan for like $50 a month. And remember, when we go do recycling, we see people walking in. They're not driving in. They're walking in with carts and things like that with lots of recycling. And a lot of them are houseless veterans and things like that we need to remember. There's a lot of reasons people become houseless. And you don't blame the person. You blame the fact that we're not helping, that we haven't done much to help. And we need to do things to help, not point out like, oh, we need to do what we can to help find solutions to a common problem. And again, the numbers here must be very low, because who answers the phone? If you're houseless, you're busy trying to probably find a job, trying to find a residence, trying to find a way to get here to there. Taking a poll isn't something you're going to want to stop and do. So the number is much higher than just what they're estimated right now. And this is just in California. So it's not surprising that California, the largest state, in terms of population, has the biggest houseless population in the country. But while about 1 in 8 Americans lives in California, more than 1 in 4 houseless Americans live here. New York and Hawaii have slightly higher per capita rates of houselessness, but California has the largest proportion of people living without shelter. About 70% of houseless people here reside outdoors. That means the state's houseless population is far more visible than in other places and more vulnerable to illness, violence, and death that accompany living on the street. California also saw the largest increase in houselessness of any state in 2020, with a 6.8% jump. That's a huge jump. And again, you have to know that a lot of the times, and a lot of you have known people that have stayed, and maybe you just didn't know they have stayed in shelters and things like that. And it's really, they said it's very frightening. I myself have had experiences with it. I mean, I don't want to go into it with this. If you want to ask me about it personally, you can. But it is very scary to live on your own and not have a shelter really and figuring out how to live day to day. But you do figure it out. The thing is that you can fall into it to where it's hard to get out of. And it's helping people get out of that, to getting back to like, oh, I can do this, and just not access to showers, not access to basic amenities like bathrooms and things like that. You know, once that becomes a process that you understand and can deal with, and also avoiding all the violence and things that goes on, which sometimes you can avoid. This is something that we really need to deal with, so none of it's really going on. That people have these basic amenities, at least the basics. So who accesses services? So newly released state numbers show that throughout 2020, so 250,000 people accessed houseless services through local agencies. About 160,000 were single adults, and nearly 85,000 in families with kids. And about 90,000 of those who accessed services were in Los Angeles County. And again, this is California. That data submitted by 42 of the 44 local agencies that manage houseless dollars and services across the state was not previously compiled or made public. So they just didn't have it all together. So that number is dynamic and about 50% higher than the one night snapshot, because tomorrow someone may have been houseless at the start of the year but housed by the end, or vice versa. So again, it is. So this is what this is showing, is that though this is a crisis, people do break out of or do get back on their feet and get going again. This is something that can happen, but it also is happening in the opposite direction. So how do we bridge that gap so it's not happening? I mean, and that's what we need, is in times of crisis like COVID, what do we have set in place to make sure that people's businesses are going under, things like that? How do we keep them from losing their homes or their houses? But it too could be an undercount, as excludes some individuals who never interacted with houseless providers, and doesn't include survivors of domestic violence who are omitted for safety purposes. According to Ollie Sutton, the state deputy secretary for houselessness. According to the state, nearly 40% of the 250,000 who accessed houseless services moved into permanent housing in 2020, which could mean anything from moving back with a family member to getting their own place. Which I would hope that more families would, if they found out, would open up rooms in their houses for loved ones. So more people are accessing houseless services. So it's difficult to estimate people experiencing houselessness in California, but the data below, well, so I'll send you this website, Sue, so that, I mean, if you want it, please ask me for it. That way you can kind of look at the numbers for yourself if it's something that you're really interested in. If you're not going to look at it, I don't want to send it to you, so you just have more stuff on your phone. But it's increasing. That's much. I'll tell you. All these numbers are just increasing in California. So, and this is an important one. Who are houseless people? Government and services providers tend to focus their efforts on chronically houseless people, an individual with a disability who has lived without consistent shelter for a year or has had multiple recent bouts of houselessness. About 36% of Californians experiencing houselessness fit that definition. So, an individual with a disability. And so, so that's a difficult situation. And disability, of course, that, as we know, is a wide spectrum. It could be physical, it could be um, developmental. There's all sorts. So there, there's a wide range there when it comes to people with disabilities. And about 36% of Californians experiencing houselessness fit that definition of having a disability of some sort, which means that the other two-thirds were newly houseless according to federal data. Um, Black people are disproportionately found in California's streets. Roughly 30% of the state's unhoused population is black, according to HUD, compared with less than 7% of the state's compared with less than 7% of the state's population. Why is that? That's a huge number for one group of people. So a legacy of racial discrimination in rental housing, higher rates of poverty among black families, the highest incidence of rent burden, and overpopulation in the state's incarceration and child welfare systems all contribute to the black community having a more difficult time with this specific issue when it comes to houselessness. And that needs to be addressed. Again, that's why there are movements like Black Lives Matter um, to combat this. That hey, this is something that has been institutionally wrong in America, in the United States of America, sorry, for a long time, and it needs to be addressed. Once we start addressing certain issues, a lot of these other issues start to kind of break down as well. But we need to really, so I mean, right now we've seen people with disabilities, which cover range of your age, your sex, your race, that's all included. Now we're breaking that down into, well, now what race of people? And it's black people disproportionately that are being affected by houselessness. The black people overrepresented in the unhoused population is neither incidental or accidental, said Bradman Green, director of Racial and Economic Justice Program for the American Civil, the ACLU, or the American Civil Liberties Union of Northern California, said during a recent California Task Force on reparations, which is something we need, is reparations for what's gone on for hundreds of years. In Los Angeles County, where black people make up 40%, so this is LA, make up 40% of houseless population and only 9% of the total population. That's ridiculous. Just ridiculous. The disparities extend into, sorry, I'll try not to voice my opinion, but it's staggering. The disparities extend into housing placements, according to a recent study. Using enrollment data from service providers, researchers found that between 2010 and 2019, a quarter of the black houseless people who had been placed in permanent supportive housing in Los Angeles, subsidized housing with voluntary support services such as drug treatment, cycled back into houselessness. That's a 39% higher incidence of relapse compared to their white peers. The study also found that black women in particular felt unsafe and unheard, and that racially discriminatory lease enforcement pushed black residents out of the system at higher rates. So again, it breaks down from, you know, larger portions to smaller. So then you take the black community and then you break that apart to men and women in the black community. And it seems like women have a harder time. A black woman would have a harder time with houselessness as well, being pushed out. So there's more statistics of the demographics of California. Wow, yeah, these are staggering statistics. So a person experiencing houselessness is about twice as likely to be male than female. Huh, but that they just okay, and significantly more likely to be LGBTQ than in the population at large. A growing proportion are seniors, with new research indicating nearly half of seniors on the street fall into houselessness after age 50. That's really frightening. And of course, the LGBTQ community, you know, people, and that's something that affects California quite a bit. So it's going to be a long class. Um, that's something that's affects California quite a bit because a lot of other people from other states, when they find out their children are gay, say, "Hey, do you have a friend or someone in California?" This is an old story that I heard when I was a kid, and it still happens today. Um, they say, "Oh, you have a family member here in California, and they're accepting of a lifestyle that we're obviously not accepting of, or who you are. It's not just a lifestyle; it's who they are." And so you're going to go live with them. Here's a bus ticket, and then they send them, and the address is actually to a McDonald's or something in California, and there's no way back, and they know that their family doesn't accept them, and so they end up being houseless and trying to find their way somewhere, being even young, but it affects that community a lot more. So again, we have to look at these things, and the more we become more aware of what we can do and accepting and caring and loving about each and every person that we come into contact with and treat them with respect and know they deserve just as much as we do as a person, just based on being alive, is something that we need to get to. So, are they local or are they coming from somewhere else? So, one of the more enduring myths about California's houseless population is that the vast majority have traveled here from other states, which does happen, like I was saying, seeking generous government assistance and whether more hospital living to outdoors. It's a baseless claim perpetuated by both sides of the state, uh, um, both sides of the aisle. Sorry, Governor Newsom has said it repeatedly or made it repeatedly. Well, so some people say people come here just because it's nicer and it's okay to be houseless here in California, but pinning down data on this issue is a challenge, but recent data provided um, to the state by 42 of the 44 local agencies that manage houseless dollars shows that between 2018 and 2020, 96% of people who access houseless services did so in single jurisdiction, so living here. Most of the people who moved went to neighboring counties, which the state suggests houselessness within California is not a problem of migration or moving from state to state. Local surveys also indicate people living on the streets are typically from the surrounding neighborhood. Example, 70% of San Francisco's houseless people were housed somewhere in the city when they lost housing. Only 8% came from out of state. But still 8%. That's still a large percent. Three-quarters of Los Angeles County houseless population lived in the region before coming houseless in California in 2020. Now, okay, so here's some good news. There is a welcome decrease in veteran and family houselessness. So, military veterans at higher risk of mental illness and substance abuse issues because of all they've seen through what they've done for our country made up a disproportionate share of the country's houseless population. It's so sad. Roughly 11,000 veterans experience houselessness in California on any given night, about 8% of the state's total houseless population. Most vets experiencing houselessness are over age 50. Again, that 50-year-old range seems to be something we need to look at, and often have significant disabilities and medical conditions that are exacerbated by precarious housing situations. Military members who experience an episode of sexual trauma during their service are at especially high risk. That I did not know. The good news is that the number of vets living on the streets has declined significantly over the past decade, both nationally and in California. Experts credit initiatives from the Obama administration, including a housing first approach, where permanent housing is provided without preconditions for addiction or mental health treatment, to help houseless vets. The city of Riverside succeeded in housing all 89 of its houseless veterans after adopting that approach. Excellent. That is good to know. So these are things we need to come up with, is plans such as what the Obama administration came up with there when it comes to this issue. While houselessness among families is also down over the last decade, was the fastest growing group in the 2020s point in time count. About 8,000 families and 12,000 children were houseless in California last year. In Los Angeles, the number spiked by 45.7%. As a result, family houselessness was the main focus of the 2021 and 22 state budget. Newsom announced a goal of zero family houselessness in the next 5 years. And unlike households without children, those with at least one child are far more likely to utilize emergency shelter or transitional housing. One striking statistic: infancy is the age at which a person in the United States is most likely to be found in a houseless shelter. Yikes. Several studies have found strong correlations between early childhood housing instability and behavioral and learning difficulties later in school, which makes sense. Also, high rents and continuing high rents are driving up houselessness, because there's a lot more to this, because there's substance abuse, but we've gone over the numbers and I don't want to go too late into the class. But there's so many things that cause houselessness. Well, yeah, this was a very long article. Well, you know what? I'm coming back to it then. So I'm going to remember where we stopped. So this has been part 1, and I'll remember this is part 1 of the houselessness crisis in California. And hopefully part 2 will be a bit shorter than this one. I didn't realize that it would be this long, but it is that big of a problem. And it's something that we need to realize that COVID has not helped. And a lot of people that you probably even know, are being affected by this. And just a lot of people feel ashamed of it and they don't want to mention it. They don't want to talk about it, so don't force people to talk about it. But if they do open up to you, be ready to listen, be ready to care, and this is why we're doing this, so we can maybe help find ways to help more. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to ask me about this class, about any of this, and I will do my best to get answers, or to, or to get you any resources, or to get anybody any resources on what to do in situations like this. Anyway, hope you have a wonderful weekend, and do something, go out and enjoy your day. Enjoy being here during this season, and give many thanks to everything that we have and can provide for ourselves and for others, which we should so choose. Okay. Have a great one, y'all. Bye.